We joked off camera about how sometimes if you see a boom mic in a film, it's not the end of the world, and somehow it's almost endearing because you feel like a kind of a kinship. Or
for me, it's not something I would want in my own films, and it's not necessarily something I'm looking for in movies. But if I see it, it doesn't bother me the way it bothers some people. Like some people, I feel like they watch a movie just to look for little mistakes, whatever they might be in the film, and I'm the opposite of that as a viewer. I want to be involved in the movie. I want to be lost in the world of the movie. And so I'm also, sometimes I'm almost willing to overlook things, errors of logic in the screenplay. Forget about boom mics, if I get taken away by a film. And that's kind of actually something I look for in movies, and it's something I try to do with my own films too,
Well, why do you think it's almost endearing, or maybe I'm just putting that word into it?
I think it's when I first started to see it when I was a teenager or whatever, it just, I noted it for what it was, and I just sort of was amused. I was like, well, that must be a low budget movie, or they didn't have time to do that. And then, once I started making films and really dealing with those time and budgetary concerns, and learning more about other people's work too, sometimes I'll see, in a certain film, I might see a dolly track and go, oh, that's there because they didn't have the time to redo that take. They didn't have the time, it was being rushed through post or whatever. And I know that because I know the backstory on these things, and I know how it can go having, now that I'm doing this professionally. So it is kind of endearing to me. It's almost like you're seeing a little bit of the world, a little bit of behind the scenes world while you're watching the film at the same time.
Right, especially too in this new Instagram sort of perfection era. It's kind of nice to see things that aren't that perfect.
Well, that's why people, myself included, like to watch movies from the 70s or the 80s and even going up through into the 90s. I think there's a certain point where CGI became a bigger part of filmmaking, and then green screen became a big part of it. And now it's almost like you don't trust the images you're seeing in any film, in any, especially bigger budget movies. You're not trusting those crowds of extras. You're not trusting the location that they say it is. You're not trusting the action sequences, how much stunts were involved in that, because that they could do it all in post, essentially. Spend a lot of money and do it in post, as opposed to a movie like, say, Sorcerer, which is one of my favorite movies, the William Friedkin movie, where you just know that they were in the jungle with those trucks and they had to deal with the realities of making that, pulling off those scenes. And I just think it's a different mental effect it has on the audience to know that somebody had to physically make that stuff happen in front of the camera, even if it was with miniatures or with rotoscoping or, this type of stuff, like say they did with the original Star Wars films. That's a whole different world than, say, what people are doing now with the same type of material, same type of genre, where it's just all CG and green screen. So that's something in my own work that I'm pretty, I guess you could even say, militant about. I like to do practical effects and all the time if I can, and if I have to use CG, it's going to be more to enhance what's there versus build something out of nothing.
That's interesting. So not trusting an image, so it's not just fake news, but fake images.
Yeah, because the tools have gotten, the technology's gotten so good, and the tools have gotten into everybody's hands, so that's just the way people make video, you could say. I guess you could probably say now, because whether it's television or movies or short videos people are making, that's just the way people do things. And so it is harder to trust what you're looking at, in not only in like fantasy films, but in documentaries or things that are positioning themselves as reality. I think it's harder to trust those type of the images in those movies too.
Right, like Sherman's March versus, I hate to throw reality TV under the bus, but just something like that where it's so raw.
Well, there's that side of it, and also if like Josephina and I know, it's funny, like there was a period where there was a lot of interchange between the movies we were making, the features we were doing, and reality TV. And I would have actors, that I directed that would then show up in a reality series playing roles. And that just completely blows it out of the water. Then we'd meet with friends who would tell us stuff too, that they were working on these shows, and they'd tell us how these shows were essentially scripted and everything was, and look, maybe the general public knows this stuff now, but not to the degree still that insiders know it. And so that just completely blows it out of the water in terms of, the narratives that are being built on these shows, or where these, real people are coming from. They're just actors looking for a gig a lot of the time. So it just completely changes your perception of those type of shows,
Do you think people almost want to believe that those people are real?
Oh yeah, they do. They definitely want to believe. Otherwise, why would they keep coming back to watching it? Why would The Bachelor still be on? I mean, it's absurd, and everyone knows it's absurd, but people still keep watching it. And I think a show like that, it's obvious more and more over time. It's become obvious that the people who are on those shows, maybe in the first couple of seasons, there was a bit more like, actual real emotion there, or a real idea of finding a guy or finding a girl. But I feel like now it's just a lot of people who are, the first thing they're thinking about is promoting themselves, promoting their brand. They've got a song that they did that was a hit somewhere. They've got a this, they got a that. And actually that's, and I'll admit, we watched those shows too. I'm not going to say I don't watch that stuff. We did. But we did stop watching it. One of the reasons we stopped watching them was because it was becoming more and more obvious people were just there to promote brands and to use as a stepping stone to some kind of a career as a host, a TV host or something like that. And then it's not real, but then there's a whole nother level of like fakery going on there, and you're just like, okay, I can't I can't do it anymore.
Well, full disclosure, I got hooked into Joe Millionaire when it first came out, and I had sworn off television, and it took me out of my abstinence. So
well, sometimes those type of shows can be fun, competition shows and reality shows. Like, I'm not going to say that I'm, immune to their charms, or and sometimes that's what you want if you've had a long day, like you're just tired and you just want to see some entertainment, light entertainment. I get it, I really get it, and then you're addictive too. But there's under the surface there is like, there's a real, especially on the shows that are kind of pushing for that, like we got people from the heartland who want to make their big break, or we got people who want to find love, and you're like, really? It seems more and more they just have brands to promote or something. They want to use that TV, exposure to further some kind of another agenda that they've got. So,
excellent. Excellent.
We made a whole horror movie about that. So
oh, you did?
We did.
Oh, let's talk about it. Let's talk about
Well, it's fresh in my mind because I was just talking about it the other day. We did this movie called Within the Woods, which is a slasher film. On paper, it's a slasher film. It was a third part of a series that I had created called Camp Blood. And the story was like, I think it was 5 people. They're on this competition show. They're dropped into the woods where these murders happened, and they've got to stay the night. They got to stay 24 hours without leaving. They can't chicken out and leave, and otherwise they'll lose. They won't get the $1 million. Anyone who stays there at the end gets $1 million. So then it just becomes this, kind of like people start getting bumped off for real. First, people are getting scared by the producers who engineered gags, to scare them off. Then people start getting killed for real. And then, of course, the whole mystery aspect of it is who done it. Which one of these people is the killer who wants to kill off all the rest so they can win the $1 million. And the reveal at the end was that the character who did all the murders was this female singer, this sort of Kelly Clarkson type, wannabe, who had a CD and had a single, and this is all she ever talks about, and she's obsessed with. And to her, in her warped mind, becoming, even if she had to kill people, and it was out there, she wanted to get fame. She wanted to get her name out there. This was her way to get her name out there. So the movie for us was a continuing a series, but for me and for Josephine, it was a chance to do something cool, kind of comment on, this was in 2005 too, when reality shows were really bigger. Survivor was a big one. These type of things were dropping people in the middle of the woods and let them, let's see who the winner is. Let's see who wins, who makes it to the end. And so we're kind of commenting on that kind of stuff and on just some people's just obsession with fame and obsession to be recognized for something, even if they have to kill for it. So that was the thing that was sort of the aspect of it that made me excited about making the movie. Because other than that, you're making another sequel. So it's all about trying to reinvent it and find a way to make it interesting for you as a filmmaker.
Do you think we're still in that realm now where people are that obsessed, or it's even more increased?
I think it's worse. I think it's worse because when we made that movie, like shows, I mean, I think American Idol was on, in fact, I'm pretty sure it was, but those type of shows that are about like people who want to be in entertainment, who are very obvious about that, there are way more of them now. You know, you have The Voice, you have the Songland that just came out, you have American Idol's Reinvented and now it's out again. There's other ones I'm probably not even thinking of right now. I think that, you know, very American sort of, you know, need to be acknowledged and recognized, and that's all been kind of pushed up by social media, of course, too. That's taken hold and created this environment too. But there are more shows like that now than there were when we made Within the Woods. So I think it's gotten worse. Yeah, I think more people want their 15 minutes of fame, and they want more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, Andy Warhol,
right.
You're 15, you know, it's now an hour and a half.
Right, they want an hour and a half. They don't just they want a series, you know. They want you know, a career out of it. They don't just want 15 minutes, they want a career. Right. So, and you wonder how many of these people are out there. Well, plenty, because these shows keep going and people keep watching it too. So, you know.
Do you think there are people in entertainment though that also just want to create stuff that they want to watch? It's not just
absolutely. I mean, I'm one of those people, and I know a lot of people like that who want to create stuff that they want to watch. I mean, and a lot of times that's where our movies come from when we talk about what movie we want to make or what movie we want to consider trying to get off the ground. It's literally, if I want to see this movie, I'm going to have to make this movie. You know, that's how a lot of our projects have started, is not with someone giving you the green light, giving yourself the green light, and making something that you otherwise, it's a real cool feeling to when you get to the end of that process, if if it goes that far, to be like, this movie wouldn't exist if it wasn't for us. Like if we hadn't, come up with this idea and nurtured it and built it and worked on it for years, it wouldn't exist. Because there's plenty of movies out there that exist independently of many of the people who work on them, which would be like most studio movies. Like today, that'd be like all studio movies, in my opinion.
You grew up in Virginia?
Yes.
So you were exposed to sort of the all-American, as pretty much as all-American as you can get.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in suburban neighborhoods, and literally it was almost like the Stranger Things sort of upbringing. Me and my friends riding our bikes around, getting into trouble, that kind of stuff, and playing video games and hanging out and reading comic books. And somewhere along the line, I sort of took my love of storytelling and reading and writing. I sort of took that to the next level and started, I got my first high-8 video camera. So.
And what did you make?
The first short I ever made, it's sort of lost now, but it was called The Beast in the Basement. And that started as a school project. I was in, how old was I when I did that? I mean, it was before, I was living in Georgia. I mean, I'm probably 12 or 13 years old, something like that. And I remember the teacher, I don't remember what she wanted us to do, but it wasn't that. I changed it over to that. We're probably supposed to deliver a paper about something we're interested in. I said, can I make a short instead? Can I make a movie instead? And so we made this short with me and my friend, and my dad shot it. My dad was the DP on it. And we got a camera from somebody. I think it was a friend of his who had it, because I didn't even own a camera at that point. Our family didn't. I did not grow up with like Super 8 films or video cameras in the house. Nobody had that. I was the one who wanted that. So we had to borrow a camera from somebody, and my dad shot it. And it was like a mad scientist creature kind of thing in the basement, a beast in the basement. And we just did it in like a day or two and showed it to the class, and everybody enjoyed it. So that I continued to do things along those lines. But my dad never shot anything for me ever again. I remember he started getting creative with some of the Dutch angles, and I was like, all right, Dad, I don't know if I want a Dutch angle for that shot. So,
So having grown up with this American experience, though, and you said just previously that it's sort of the American way, you have to be known for something. Do you see maybe the European way or another way where it's more about the art of it, the love of it, creating something? Do you think that can be possible in the American experience, or it has to be about you've got to do the TED Talk, you've got to make sure that it's out there, you're recognized?
I think that the publicity nowadays has superseded the content in terms of, you know, I'm talking about film people, artists, anybody really. Unfortunately, I think people are spending way more time doing PR and finding new ways to get the, you know, whether it's Twitter or social media, whatever they're doing. There's a lot of putting the cart before the horse nowadays that I see. I see it with younger people and I see it with older people. I mean, it's not like one generation is just doing that and nobody else is. I think there's a lot of that going on. Part of it is because the times we live in. You do have to cut through the noise, and you do have to find ways to get your name out there. And getting your work out there, that's harder than it used to be. And you don't have as many people cheerleading for you, or let's just say invested in you, because they're going to make money too, like you used to. So you have to do more of the work yourself, and you have to find more ways to kind of spread it around. In terms of that turning into like creating a monster where you've got people who are just completely about the exposure and not about doing any actual work, yeah, there are people like that. You know, I mean, I don't think I'm one of those people, and I try to not associate with people like that. But there are a lot of people like that, and sometimes they do get more attention than me or other people who are just more like, let's do the work, let's do a good job, let's make sure this thing is really as good as it can be, the movie, you know, before we release it. Let's, I think sometimes there's people that are blowing through things really quick and not thinking about, you know, the end result. It's more about just getting your voice out there and being louder than everybody else, you know? So a European, I don't know if I think it is more of an American thing than a European thing, for sure. Yeah.
That being said, though, social media is necessary, especially in the independent space. If you don't have money to pay a publicist.
That's why it's assumed such a great importance, especially in the independent, everywhere really. But I mean, the independent world, yeah, it's assumed much more of a importance than say it used to have, because the infrastructure is so shaky and minimalized from what it used to be, and it was never easy. I don't want to give the impression it was ever easy to make independent movies, because it was not, for me or anybody. But it has, taken on a greater role because of that, because the infrastructure to support you is not there as much as it used to be. I'm talking about distributors and theatrical play, reviews, big brick and mortar stores, foreign sales, things that used to boost the impact of your film, boost your profile, and you didn't have anything to do with it.
Sure.
I've been doing this long enough that's how it was when I started.
Right, Blockbuster, the little section that had all the cool indie films, like there would be 25 of one movie that I'd be like, okay, I know I don't want to see that one.
Yeah.
But where's like the weird like indie ones, and it was such a treasure to find that. And
all those stores. Yeah, I mean,
except for one.
And that was a huge goal actually back then, was getting your movie into Blockbuster, and a lot of us didn't succeed in that. I got a few movies into Blockbuster. But it was after making, I don't know, let's say I'd probably directed 10 movies before I got a movie into Blockbuster.
Oh, wow.
And these are all distributed, by the way, commercially distributed. But, you get your Hollywood Video was sort of the one that would take more indie films. They were more indie friendly. Blockbuster was like the big, house on the hill with the big gates that, they wouldn't open for anyone except the studios. So it was very tough to get an indie title into Blockbuster back then.
Do you remember walking in there and finally seeing it then?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the movie I got in was called Death Factory, and of course it was a thrill to see it on the shelf, to see it on the new release wall. I remember sometimes we'd go in, my wife and I would go in to rent movies, and then I'd always sort of want to see how my titles were doing, like, did they rent? or sometimes you'd even see people standing there looking at it and considering whether to rent it or not. So you have to restrain yourself. Oh yeah, it's great. You should get that movie. You should rent that. Yeah, that was like that's something that today's filmmakers, they will never have that experience. You know, independent filmmakers won't have that experience to walk into a store that was a store that they had gone in as a customer, as a fan, and then see their own movie on the shelf. I can't describe the thrill of that. You know, I wish I'd taken photos back then, because I didn't, because I thought that was going to go on forever. I never thought, I didn't think video stores were going to like go out of business the way they did, but you know, you never know, right? I mean, it's always some change, and Netflix came in and then sort of eroded that after a while. But when it was happening, I mean, no, none of us have photos of that in general, because we didn't think that was gonna. Why would you want to take a picture of that?
There was no iPhone, so you'd have
to. Yeah, that's the thing too. We would be taking that picture on film probably back then.
A Polaroid,
or at least with a Polaroid or something. Yeah, so it was. But anyway, yeah, it was a big thrill to see it on the shelf. For sure.
What was your first job in film and television when you got to Los Angeles?
The first movie job I ever had was on a movie called Kiss the Girls, which was this Paramount movie I worked on in '96, summer of '96. It was between my third and fourth year of film school. And the director of that movie is Gary Fleeter, who is from my hometown, and I knew him. And he also went to Boston University, where I went to film school. So we had those two things in common. And I had gotten in touch with Gary a little bit before that. Just wrote him a letter saying I'm this young film student, young filmmaker from Virginia Beach and all this. And he had actually gotten back to me and been very encouraging. And he actually told me, I'm going to be making this movie, this little movie with Morgan Freeman. And would you like to work on that? So it was perfect timing, because it was the summer. And I was able to work on that. It was essentially an internship for school, but it was like a real working internship, because I got to see I worked on it for about 2 months, 2.5 months, and just see the whole inner workings of a movie, and a big movie too, a $35 million movie. And it was just a very cool experience. Gary was great to give me that opportunity, and I learned a lot about, I would say, things that I think are good and also bad, in terms of the wastefulness sometimes of big studios, and the sort of the standing around and not much going on. But it was just such an invaluable experience just to see how movies are made, the Paramount lot, all of that. So it was just a really cool, and I loved being on set. That was something I learned. I had made shorts and even features with my friends on video up to that point, but it was the first time I'd been on a professional movie set. And I just loved the atmosphere of the set with a bustling crew and all the things that go on. I enjoyed it a lot.
I think I rented that movie at Blockbuster. I can remember.
That was a hit movie. Yeah, it's Morgan Freeman and Ashley Judd.
Right,
on the box.
You can see them on the side.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were both really cool. I remember I had to buy a birthday present for Morgan Freeman at one point. They said, "Go get a birthday present for Morgan Freeman." And I said, "Well, what does he like?" Well, he likes boats. He's
cool.
big on boating, so I bought him a book about boats. And the other thing I remembered about Ashley Judd, and she was pretty new back then. It was one of maybe her first big movie. Is she baked brownies for the PAs.
Oh,
she was super nice. She had somebody bring ice cream down one time, like a cart, like a Haagen-Dazs cart, like just ice cream for everyone on the crew.
Oh, cool.
I mean, she was really cool, and
that's great.
I mean, frankly, it was a lot of cool people. It was a lot of cool people on the film, and it was a great introduction to LA for me, because I think I'd been out here once prior to that, just visiting a friend for like a week, and every day you're going to a different location. And it was kind of funny, because my dad came out here with me at first, it helped me move into this apartment. I was like renting a room in this apartment in the Valley. And he's like, well, we'll go to the location, because we got the call sheet, and he's like, we'll go over to the location the day before, so you know where to go and how to get there. He was just trying to help, And we did go to the location, which was a hospital, and an abandoned hospital in downtown or something. Well, that was great for the first day, or maybe the second day, but then we had a company move, and then we did another company move. So basically, I had a crash course in LA freeways and directions and this is in '96, so no GPS. Using the Thomas Guide and the call sheets and the directions, they would give you those little maps. And sometimes I messed up, but I always made it to set every day on time, relatively on time. Because they couldn't have started without me, but it was a real learning experience. Yeah.
How soon after that did you make a full move, or that room in that apartment was your full move?
I was just there for the summer. In fact, I should probably mention the other flip side of that. The other experience I had was I worked at Scott Free Productions, Ridley Scott's company, after Kiss the Girls. That same summer, I interned over there as a script reader for about a month and a half. And that was interesting. It was like going from the set work, every day you're at a new location, you're in the woods, you're in wherever, the beach, and then to being in an office in Beverly Hills every day, air conditioned with, Kern's Nectars up there for everybody to take. And, I have to say, nice people, really nice people. I learned a lot, but I was so much more a fan of being on set. That was something I discovered about myself that summer for sure, in terms of what direction I wanted to go in the movie business. I didn't move out here until the following summer, '97. And that was right after graduation. And I had a job lined up, literally once again got a call from another director to work on a movie, which I was fortunate to be able to do so quickly, So then once I moved out here in the summer of '97, I stayed, and that's been here ever since.
I think that's such a valuable thing for people at a young age to know. Either they're not the office guy, or they're not I'm going to be out there, seat of my pants trying to figure stuff out. Yeah,
it was just, my favorite part of filmmaking is the shoot. That's never changed, whether I was a teenager or now. And being in an office, it was interesting to read scripts. And I remember reading a lot of scripts while I was there. I read, the first time I ever read a Tarantino script on the page. First time I read a Kevin Williamson script. First time I read, I don't know, they had a bunch of interesting things over there, and things they were, not necessarily the things they were making, because they weren't making as much stuff as they do now. They were making like a movie a year back then. Now they're like huge, they've got TV shows and movies running all the time. But it was just, development was not really my thing. Not because I love reading and I love writing. And I came into film as a writer, more than a director initially. But I just enjoy the set experience, this sort of, adventure of being on set more.
Did you have a car when you first came to LA? I
did, yeah. I had a car. In fact, my dad and I drove cross country from Virginia.
Oh, wow.
That summer we drove. That was an adventure too, We drove cross country, kind of followed almost like the old Route 66. At least for part of it. And it took about a week, I think, for us to drive out, or maybe less than a week. It was like 4 days. But anyway, we drove out here, and I had a car. Gotta have a car, especially on Kiss the Girls. I mean, you're, one day you're driving to El Segundo, one day you're driving to Malibu, one day you're driving to, Santa Clarita.
Right. Did it almost spoil things for you? Because you know how when you have a really great first experience with something, then you think everything else like that's going to be like that. And some sets are amazing and everybody gets along and it's like a very special experience. Yeah. And then others, it's actually not that way.
Well, I have to tell you, the two movies I worked on after that were much more special experiences for me. And they were lower budget movies. They were more like in the $1 million range per movie. Because the first two films I worked on out here was a movie called Spoiler. It was a sci-fi action movie. And then the next movie was actually filmed in Romania. And that was a kid's movie, kind of a kid's horror movie. And these were, low budget films, direct-to-video movies made, mostly under one roof. Like I remember the Spoiler was filmed entirely in Burbank in this stage that used to be an old warehouse or something. And they shot 3 movies there in a row. They just switched out the walls, repainted certain parts of it. And they shot 3 movies in a row. And our movie was the 3rd movie. And I remember when they had a wrap party, they had a wrap party for all 3. The producers didn't feel like springing for 3 wrap parties. So we just had one. It was a big wrap party. I met a lot of people at that wrap party. And then the one in Romania was even lower budget, and it was like the most fun I'd ever had in my life. You know, so the big budget thing, you know, the Paramount thing was a great learning experience, but it was not, it didn't have that sense of fun and sense of creativity. And I should also bring up, very importantly, that on Spoiler, I was able to direct second unit as a you know, 22-year-old recent film school grad. I was given a designated DP, AC, and 35 millimeter Panavision camera, and I was allowed to direct second unit on this movie. So, you know, that's something that that surely wouldn't have happened on Kiss the Girls. And that was because of the director I was working with, and he was just a super nice guy, Jeff Burr, who took me under his wing and you know, brought me onto these films. So I guess the lesson from that might be that, you know, the lower budget movies, you learn more, you get to do more, you get to have more creative input sometimes into things. And you get to know everybody a bit more too, because there's not as many people working. You know, there aren't like, maybe there's 50 people working versus 100 or 200 or something like that, you know? So all great experiences though, you know?
At what point did you say you were not done working on sets for other people, but you wanted to be driving your own film, your own content?
You know, I never had a specific point where I stopped. In fact, the first writing directing job I got was so low paid that I didn't stop doing those set jobs. It was a movie called Scream Queen, and I was thrilled to get the opportunity to write and direct, but you know, almost immediately after that, I went back to doing, I was doing special effects assistant work and production assistant work and stuff like that. So I kept doing that. And that kind of went on a little bit like that for a year or two. But you know what's interesting about that is, on those bigger films that I was PAing on or doing special effects, I met a lot of people. I met a lot of professional, good people, effects artists and, you know, camera people and all this kind of thing. So that my movies, when I started to get to direct more and more, I was able to bring them onto those films, or at least consult with them, and they would, like, say, recommend an intern who was really good or something like that. So I think that was a really good thing, and it's something that I still believe it now, that people should, who want to get in the business, and you know, everybody wants to direct and everybody can't wait to direct, but it's really, really good to work on other positions, you know, in other departments, and learn from those departments and learn from that experience and see how sets are run and see what works and what doesn't work, what you like and don't like. And also you will meet people, and those people will be the people you work with or you call favors from when you do direct a short or a feature. So that's kind of how it happened for me.
Now, Scream Queens, I remember Rhonda Shear used to do the USA Up All Night, and
Yeah.
they would show like movies like that were just some really just fascinating.
I know a lot of the people who made those movies. I used to watch that show too.
It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
She was a great host.
Okay, well, the Scream Queen had this actress named Linnea Quigley.
Yes.
Who's, okay, so you know who she is. Well, she was the star of our movie. And once again, our movie wasn't really, it was a very modest film, but because I had worked on other stuff and I knew I knew people, I was able to call in a favor, at least from a friend, and say, hey, I know you know Linnea, would you be willing to tell Linnea about this movie we're trying to make, and would she be willing to read the script? And that's how we got the script to her, and I met with her, had a great sit-down meeting with her, and you know, and she was in. It was not a huge time commitment for her, and we also sort of repaid the favor by shooting a music video for a song that she had done at the time. She had a song called This Chainsaw's Made for Cuttin'. It was sort of the Nancy Sinatra, you know, kind of like that. Mm-hmm. So we did so she acted in our movie for a couple of days. We did a music video for her, and you know, we had fun doing it. And of course, for me, it was really cool to work with her. But yeah, she was in a lot of those type of films. She is a Scream Queen. She's a major Scream Queen, and that's why she was in the movie in the first place. It was sort of a self-referencing kind of a Hollywood on Hollywood movie, you know. That was the idea with that one. So it was really cool to have her in the film. It was a good start for me.
At what point did the stakes rise for you with making films, where you had money that was given to you and it became more serious, and then it became more stressful at times because now you're responsible for more? And how did you handle that?
I think that one of the movies that happened for me on was a movie I did called Demon's Kiss, which was well, it was the biggest budget I'd had till that point. I'd probably directed 5 or 6 movies till that point. And Demon's Kiss was a bigger budget. It was shot on film. That's right off the bat. That's puts you in another bracket economically, you know. And it was a longer schedule, and it was just a bigger film. And it was the first film I was making for this particular company. And and also it was a script that it was a concept I had pitched to the investor, which I should point out that a lot of the films that were made back then, especially horror films and exploitation films and stuff, sometimes someone would just come to you, or they come to the producer you're working with and say, we want to make this movie, X movie, and are you in or you out? They already had a title, they already had artwork, they'd already done pre-sales in Milan or something, and it was your choice whether you wanted to be involved in the movie or not. Demon's Kiss was something I pitched. I had the title, the concept, and I pitched it, and it got the green light. So, and I was writing it and directing it. So it was very important to me, not only to handle the production well and come in on budget and but to make a good movie that I'd be happy with too, because I was actually getting more resources to do it with. That was one of the films, I think, for sure, that I was, and it wasn't, I can't say I had fun making that movie. I mean, I've made movies. What I a lot of times say is the movies I've had the most fun making, they didn't turn out as well, or they didn't do as well. Some of the ones that have been nightmares to make, they're like some of my most successful films. I don't know why exactly that is sometimes, because I work hard on everything I direct, but it just turns out that way sometimes. Demon's Kiss was a really hard movie to make. It wasn't a huge hit necessarily, but it wasn't, didn't disappear either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. But I just remember every day on that, talking about a different location every day. I had 2 DPs. I had a DP who was forced on the production, who was more or less trying to take over the movie. I had to take him aside early on and tell him that that's not going to happen, that's not going to work. And after that, he was fine. But that was something I had to contend with on the first day of shooting.
Wow.
There was a lot of nudity in the film. It was an erotic thriller. And it was the most of those type of scenes I've ever had to direct at that point. So thankfully the actors were really cool and professional and all that, but that was kind of a challenge for me too. And I just, the post-production was also very challenging, let's just say, in terms of the movie I saw it being versus what the executive producer saw it as being. But yeah, that was probably one of the first times I remember feeling, and I just gotten married too. So it was like, and it was the first movie I made after I got married, and we'd been prepping it for a long time. So, the more prep you have, sometimes the more psyched out you can get. That's why I don't like to have too much prep on a film. I like to have some, but not too much, because then after a while you can start to psych yourself out a bit.
That's really interesting. The ones that didn't turn out the best actually were the most fun, and then vice versa. That's fascinating.
It's weird. I mean, like, for example, I mentioned this movie Death Factory that I had in Blockbuster, my first movie in Blockbuster. Okay, that was a nightmare to make that movie. We're shooting in a location that didn't have running water and barely had electricity. There were no bathrooms, and it was interior, and it was in the dead of summer, super hot, and we were like bringing in fans, but it wasn't enough. It was a haunted attraction, like a closed down haunted attraction that we were shooting in that was closed for the summer. But it was just it was ridiculous. And there was a lot of effects. There was a lot of gore. Everyone was getting covered in blood, sticky blood. And our days would always go longer and longer. And, it was one of those shoots where you start off with normal days, and then by like day 5 or 6, you're starting at like 5 p.m., And it was really tough to make, but that ended up being one of my most well-known successful movies. I will say when we were making it, I had a feeling about it that it would do well, and it would turn out well, actually. I don't know if it would do well. I knew it would turn out well because I just could see what I was seeing on screen. I could see in the monitor and on set, I could tell that it was delivering. It was the kind of movie I'd like to see, that I would be happy with it if I rented it. That's like my gauge a lot of times, most of the time is I want to see a film, I want to make a film that I'd like to see and that I'd be happy with as a jaded horror fan. you know? So, yeah.
Does one start out a jaded horror fan, or it builds after?
It builds because I interact a lot with like fans and stuff, and there's like fans of different generations who like some of my older movies and stuff, and there's like just starting out, and it's funny because like it's fun almost to see somebody get excited about some 80s slasher that you've seen like 20 times or you've seen 10 times, and you're like, yeah, whatever, what's the big deal about that? But well, it is a big deal to them now because they're just discovering it. But you do get, once you see more and more stuff, you do get jaded, yeah. And then you've made movies too, on top of it, you really get, it's hard to maintain the kind of enthusiasm and the, the excitement about new release horror, sometimes.
Right, I'm coming here, whatever age, always say, well, I'm not gonna end up like that, like sort of dream crusher or whatever, and then I think enough things happen and you don't mean to do it. And I'm not saying that's how you are. I'm just saying, but we all have to like check ourselves because it's like so easy to be jaded about whatever it is.
I saw a lot of that too when I first moved here. I saw it from guys who were in their 40s.
Right.
When I was in my early 20s or getting to my mid 20s, I saw from guys in their 40s who were super jaded, and I thought they had the best jobs in the world. And I'm like, what are you complaining about? What's your problem? And, of course, there are levels to all of these things that people, if you don't really know them, you don't know the whole story.
Sure.
But I mean, just having said that, just as a general statement, I think it's very, very important to keep your enthusiasm about what you're doing and your gratefulness for what you've been able to accomplish, because, it's very, very hard to make any movie, any type of movie, any budget movie, whatever. It's very, very difficult. And anyone who does that, I mean, that's an accomplishment right there. And there's, if you've been lucky enough to make a few, and then some of those have actually gone out and have fans and people that like your stuff and they appreciate what you've done, that's, you should be very appreciative of that, I think. I don't think you should ever lose your appreciation for that or your love of the game. And it's really hard to it's really easy to lose your love of the game because this is a very difficult game to be in. It's probably easier to maintain your love of cinema than it is the business of cinema, but you can't have one without the other, so.
Yeah, that's true. I know sometimes I think if you dip your toe back into what you don't want, then you have a new appreciation for kind of like what you have a little bit. Because you can.
I think it's very easy to see the glass half empty. I think we're, as humans, are engineered that way no matter what we're doing, what field we're in. But I see it sometimes from other filmmakers that seem like they're not my peers, who have also some very cool accomplishments, but they always seem to focus on the thing that they didn't get. The store that their movie didn't get into, the festival they didn't get into, the money they didn't make, the this, that. And I'm thinking, you can choose to see it that way, but there's so many other good things that have happened for your film that you ought to be happy with. And sometimes that's something that Josephine and I talk about is, let's always be grateful and thrilled for the stuff that goes right and stuff that works and the people that approach us about doing cool things with the movie, because you should be appreciative of that stuff. And there's a lot of people out there doing it, and there are more people now than when I started making all kinds of movies. So you do have to you have to train yourself to see it half full, I think, because there's a lot of negativity, but you just don't want to let that be your go-to reaction,
Right, and I like what you said about there's a difference between the love of cinema and then the love for the business, but sometimes the love of cinema can reignite it.
It does. I mean, like we watch movies, regularly, and all different types of movies, new movies, old things that we haven't seen. Sometimes we watch something that we just both love, and like we both love Paul Schrader films. And like when we first met, we first started talking about Paul Schrader, and I thought there was this cool girl that knows who Paul Schrader is, and she's in Romania, and she loves Paul Schrader movies. And because most people, like when I was in film school, most people were only interested in Kevin Smith and Tarantino. They didn't care about Bob Fosse, Schrader, Friedkin, any of these guys. So, and I was more interested in that type of stuff. So we'll just sometimes watch something that we really love, that we know it's good. And then you discover another layer of it usually, because these are great films. They hold up for, repeat viewings. And you discover another layer, whether it's the sound or the photography or a performance or something. So yeah, you need to renew your love for movies that way, I think, for sure.
Yeah, and when all else goes wrong, just
Yeah, it's absolutely.
Sometimes,
Reminds you of why you're doing this, why you're putting yourself through this, and because well, otherwise, why am I this torture that I'm torturing myself here? Why, you know? Well, it's something you're aspiring to, and it's also a world that you want to contribute to, and that's what we're doing this, because we want to contribute to film, to the not to sound pretentious, but the art of cinema or the history of film or whatever you want to call it.
So instead of must love dogs, must love Paul Schrader.
Right, exactly. That would be a prerequisite. Must be a fan of American Gigolo and cat people.
Do you feel like there are common traits every horror protagonist has to have, or no, it just varies from movie to movie?
I think it varies. It seems to vary. I mean, I think that the genre throughout history has loved strong female characters. I really do. I mean, I think that's something that you can trace back through many films. You can go back to the 60s, you can go back to Rosemary's Baby, you can go back to, I'm sure earlier examples, especially the 60s on. And as you get into the 80s and you get, the final girl from slasher films, and you get the strong female lead from like Romero's Dawn of the Dead, sometimes they're just the survivors, but sometimes they're more than a survivor. They're an instigator. And nowadays, I think the whole game has changed, But I think that strong female characters have been part of the genre for a long, long time. I mean, I'm not talking about scream queens, really. I'm talking about intelligent survivors who have their wits, like Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, this type of thing.
Or Catherine Ross in Stepford Wives. Was she?
Sure, you could use that.
She was more passive, but there was a strength in her.
Yeah, I think that like people use the term scream queen, and I think when they kind of came up in the 80s with slasher films, and I think there's a difference between like the sort of the scream queen victim sort of screaming type and what like Jamie Lee Curtis was doing a lot of times was she was genuinely a tougher, intelligent, like the part she played in Halloween and some of the other horror films she did around that time. I think there is a difference there between those two.
Betty Buckley. Sorry to interrupt. Betty Buckley and Carrie, who kind of like.
Well, I think Carrie herself. I think Sissy Spacek is like. I mean, she's that's what's so cool about that movie and that character, and that's why people keep coming back to it with remakes and stuff. Is she's like the monster and she's kind of the hero. I mean, you really feel for her. I mean, have you ever felt for a character so much in a horror movie or maybe almost any movie? I mean, she is so victimized, and at the same time, she's so relatable. Like even if your situation, growing up wasn't that intense, you still relate to her. It's still those pressures of high school and all that stuff that Stephen King tapped into. I think that's an incredible character. And what's cool is that it creates weird feelings at the end because she's, killing all these people, and you don't know how to feel about that because you're like, well, it's kind of awful, but you're kind of glad, you're kind of happy for her. It's a mixed emotions, but.
Yeah, that's a real traumatic movie to see too if you're under a certain age, I think.
Oh yeah, my whole feelings about that movie have actually, like, I've appreciated it more and more over the years. Back then I was sort of under this impression when I first saw it, I was sort of not a fan of De Palma. I thought his movies were over directed and too baroque and everything with a split screen and all that. But since then, like, we've watched it a few times, and every time I watch, I'm like, I'm not looking at any of that stuff. You're just looking at the performances and how good they are, and you're just so involved in these characters. And I think it's easily one of the best Stephen King adaptations for sure. Maybe the best, one of the best out there.
What's the best way to get people to read your script?
Well, those platforms have kind of changed over time. There used to be different ways to do that. I mean, probably for me, see, I've always written with an eye toward directing. So for me, a script is just a blueprint for a movie that hasn't been made yet. That's all. I've always seen it that way. Even though I've done writing gigs, that for other, for different producers, and the movie didn't get produced, but put everything into that. But I've always written a script just with an eye toward getting it produced. And so I would just, I don't know, like I think you need to, I don't know, see nowadays it's so different. It's so different. I mean, there's still the, you know, Script Shark and all these different, you know, sites that people go, I don't trust those things. I don't trust those sites. I feel like they just take your money and then who knows what happens with it. You know, I think I'm the type of person who, I entered screenplay competitions early on. That's something I could say. I think it's good to enter screenplay competitions. I do believe that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just don't go bankrupt doing it. You know, don't spend your last dime on it. But I don't know. I'm just the type of person who I never really entered a lot of things like that. Yeah, I'm just telling you. I'm sure this doesn't make great interview material. It's a lot of stopping and starting. I'm just being honest. I mean, like, I entered some screenplay competitions and I placed in some of them too, but those things didn't get produced. And then the first screenwriting job I ever got, actually it was while I was on Kiss the Girls. I was walking around the set with horror t-shirts on, The Exorcist, Evil Dead, and the craft service guy said, "You're a big horror fan?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a horror fan." And I made some shorts and he said, "How about you rewrite a script for me? I'll pay you to rewrite a script." And this is the guy who's literally picking up trash. Like he's got the you know, like the pointer, you know, picking up trash. Awesome. And he's like, "I got a horror script that needs a rewrite." And I remember he said to me, we were negotiating. And he said, "Well, I heard that Tarantino got $500 to rewrite From Dusk Till Dawn," because that's what happened with that. That started as a script by some effects artists who wanted to make a movie, and Tarantino got involved, and that's how the whole thing started. And I don't know if that's how much he got paid, but anyway, that's what this guy said. And he said, $500? He said, "How about if I give you what Tarantino got to do that?" And I said, "Okay, sure. Of course I'll take that. I'm thrilled. I'm 22 years old, and I'm 21 years old. I'm working on a movie, and I'm going to do a script rewrite on the side." So probably the reason I bring that up is you need to be around film people. You need to be around people who want to make movies. Everybody's got a movie they want to make. Like I remember another job I got, this is before I got anything produced, another screenwriting job I got was something that it was a script I optioned. That's what it was. It was some brothers, it was like two twin brothers, and they were friends of some effects artists whose shop I was working in at the time. Just, I was doing effects work. And they wanted to, they were looking for scripts that they could act in. Just horror scripts, whatever. And so I had this script. I told my friend I wrote a script, and he said, "Oh, I'll show it to these guys." And he showed it to them, and they optioned it from me. And I remember they used to finish each other's sentences on the phone. They were like, it was like the Coen brothers, So those were my first two paid script things, and it just came from being around film people, from being around. I think people who just sit at home and they are in front of the computer, they're not going to get anywhere with that. You can submit to Script Shark, yeah, you'll spend money. You won't make money, you'll spend money. And it's not all about making money either. Because somebody wants to make your movie and it's gonna get off the ground, that's great. And if your first credit, you made it, you know what I mean? But in terms of those are some of my early experiences. I don't know, I mean.
Those are cool stories. That was in the 90s though, right? So
it was in the 90s.
There was dial-up maybe. But
see, all that stuff didn't exist, and I don't know, maybe that was just as well. Because these were fun. I'm just telling you, I had fun doing these things, with the guy with the craft services. I mean, I ended up going over I remember with him over to Neo Art and Logic, which was Neo. They were making movies with Miramax. They're making horror movies with Miramax. So I was sitting in their offices. Did that lead anywhere? No, but it was that was cool to be sitting there, and he was honest, and he paid me what he said he was going to pay me. And the movie didn't get made, but so what, it was just a nice gig, and I did the best I could with it, and, and the thing with the brothers didn't get made either. But the first thing that I wrote that got produced was something I directed. It was a package deal. I pitched Scream Queen to the producer, who I was working as a PA. I was working as a PA on this movie, and the producer was doing smaller films, even smaller than the one we were making. And he said, "Hey, do you have some ideas for some stuff?" And I pitched him a few, and Scream Queen was one, and he said, "That sounds good. Let's do that." So, but that was a writing, directing package. So once again, I was on a set in the desert. We're in the Mojave Desert, sitting in the guy's car, talking at lunch, and that was how the deal was made.
Wow.
So these things are all bound up in being out there and doing stuff. They're not about being at home and emailing and texting and stuff. But like you said, it was the 90s, different time. And I know that there's these sites out there and stuff that people, I know people probably have gotten stuff from that too. I'm not saying they don't, but that's just not my background. You look on Mandy, if you, to get a bit more updated or whatever, if you go on Mandy and these sites, people are looking for scripts. People are looking for writers, and I've gotten jobs that way too. I've gotten jobs completely out of the clear blue from a guy looking for a guy to do rewrites on his horror script, and I've gotten jobs like that too. So.
It's a cool story.
Yeah.
I like that story.
That's one that I wasn't out in the desert for. It was just at home in front of my computer.
Right. That's just awesome. The guy's just picking this stuff up, and I mean.
Yeah, he was literally picking up trash, and I had these T-shirts on, and Carrie Elwes was on that film too, and he was like, "Oh man, awesome shirt!" Like he loved my Exorcist shirt because I had Linda Blair throwing up on the shirt. I had like different horror T-shirts. All I wore was black T-shirts back then. Had Evil Dead, Reanimator, and Exorcist. So I just wear those every day, and I guess I became like known as the horror guy or something. And I was playing my short film. I was really obnoxious. They had a TV in the craft services trailer, and I would play my short film in there any chance I got. So people were, trying to get like some, an Almond Joy, and they had to like watch part of the movie while they're in there.
Did they let you play it at the place where they had the Kern's Nectars?
No.
Oh, okay.
They had no interest in my short film over there.
I was just curious.
No, I got plenty of Kerns, and
right.
whatever, granola bars, but
you weren't allowed to play your short in the.
I don't think so. They didn't have anywhere to play it. They didn't have anywhere to play it. It was just an office, And
right.
I remember pulling open a drawer. They asked me to file some coverage, and I pulled open a drawer and I saw the coverage for 7. Pass.
Oh, wow.
Not interested. This will not do well. Pass. And that's and that's good to see things like that too, because you see that one person's pass is another person's huge success. If they take the chance on the project, you never know. I mean, no one knew 7 would do as well as it did. I mean, when that movie came out, it was so under the radar, So it was interesting to see these things. Like I remember seeing Scary Movie before it was Scream, and they probably passed on that one too. They were passing on a lot of stuff.
Who was reading all this?
Well, there were executives, but I don't think they were farming it out to readers. They were just using the interns as readers. Like the big agencies have they used to have before they downsized. They used to have readers, so that was their job, just to read scripts. But not really anymore.
Did they let you do that? Did you do coverage?
They did. I took scripts home with me and read them, yeah. Yeah, they would call it the weekend read. I remember we'd meet like on a Thursday or Friday or whatever, and they'd give you scripts, and then you'd come in on like a Monday, probably it was Monday or Tuesday, and we would all sit down. It wasn't a lot of people, it was like 5 people. We'd sit down, me and maybe 2 other interns, and we just, okay, what'd you guys read? What did you think? They wanted to know what we thought, which was pretty cool, So I was reading all different types of movies too, dramas, period pieces, sci-fi stuff. They were reading they had a lot of scripts coming in,
Were these younger people they were having? Because did they want to know the pulse of like the younger
I don't know if they did. I mean, if they did, they didn't let on to that. But there was me, all the interns were the same age. We're all in like our early 20s, So but the executives weren't like, they probably were maybe 10 years older than us or something like that, But I don't know. I just, we just did that, and that was kind of like business as usual over there. So.
But did you realize you were part of this big machine, or
that felt like a big machine? Paramount and Scott Free both felt like big machines to me. They both felt like there's this machine moving forward, and there isn't any particular person driving it. It's just going, and that's really how big studio movies are more than ever, I would say, and development and a lot of this stuff. It's very hard. They almost thrive on a lack of like one person being in charge or one person taking the blame, or they specifically created that kind of infrastructure so nobody gets really, nobody has to take the fall for something that doesn't work. But I just prefer, I think from early on, I prefer this sort of lower budget film sets where the director's really directing, and if the director doesn't show up, nothing happens. And, it's just more of a creative environment where people can contribute more, and everybody, gets to contribute more. Actors, everybody, So, and I'm not saying these films were like cakewalks, because there were ups and downs on all these movies, but that I saw happen. Sometimes I was shocked, to see people get overruled, see directors get overruled, things like that. You think directors are gods when you're growing up reading film magazines. You think that nobody tells a director. That's the last word. It's almost like the old Hollywood idea of that, which I don't know if even that was really true, but at least that's the myth, So to see that, it was eye-opening.
To be on set and see someone's like power usurped, sort of?
Yeah, to see, like on Spoiler, there were scenes that were literally, there was an actor that had makeup on that he wanted to do and the director wanted to do, and one of the producers found it offensive. She was like a devout Christian and she was offended by the makeup, and she made them reshoot that scene. There were other times where one of the producers who was out of town doing probably a film market or something, because he was more like he had directed stuff in the past, but he was really more of a money guy. He came down toward the end and decided he wanted to direct the movie. So there were parts of that movie where the director was sort of literally sidelined, and that other guy was calling action. And this type of stuff happens all the time. But for me, seeing that, it was eye-opening, yeah, for sure.
To be on set and see someone's like power usurped, sort of?
Yeah, to see, there were scenes that were literally, there was an actor that had makeup on that he wanted to do and the director wanted to do, and one of the producers found it offensive. She was like a devout Christian and she was offended by the makeup, and she made them reshoot that scene. There were other times where one of the producers who was out of town doing probably a film market or something, because he was more like he had directed stuff in the past, but he was really more of a money guy. He came down toward the end and decided he wanted to direct the movie. So there were parts of that movie where the director was sort of literally sidelined, and that other guy was calling action. And this type of stuff happens all the time. But for me, seeing that, it was eye-opening, yeah, for sure.
Without mentioning any names, did you ever see people set up to fail? Where you could tell like, oh, they gave this person like a bad opportunity and now someone else is going to come in and look like the hero? Without naming
I don't think I've seen that level of like, manipulation going on or overthinking. I've just seen directors, I mean, it's happened to me, but I've seen it on a lot of films before, I started directing, where it was almost like they were just being cut off at the knees, like we'd be shooting, like we did a film in Romania, and they just decided at one point, they stopped sending film stock. They had a delay. I forget what happened, but it was some kind of a delay in the delivery of a film negative. And yet they weren't going to necessarily give him extra days to shoot. The schedule wasn't going to get longer. You're just going to, lose days because you didn't have film delivered. Well, what do you expect? What do you expect for those type of situation? But so I'd see people get put in situations where it's like, what do you think's going to come out of this? It's not going to be good. You're cutting your own movie off, basically. But I've seen that time and time again, and I've seen that plenty of times on things I've directed too. Usually, what it is if anything, it's producers who are lazy, who just figure, well, the director cares more about this movie than I do, so I'm just not going to show up today, or I'll show up for half the day, or they can just do whatever. They can just, manage it. And guess what? Yeah, we are going to manage it because we do care and we want the movie to come out well. So that's I don't know if you call those mind games. I think sometimes it's just more like laziness, but there is a little bit of a mind game going on there, because you're doing that knowing that the person is going to, take up the slack, Do you let on that you know that? Or do you try to carry on like everything's great and hopefully it becomes great? I probably initially carried on more and didn't say anything. And then there were other times where I flat out would tell them what I thought, and that's why, like, this one producer that I did a lot of movies for, I just stopped working with him after a while because I couldn't take it anymore. I just couldn't take. But that and many other things. Laziness and incompetence I can take more than like meanness and name calling and personal attacks and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, you do get to a point where because you really are partners in this. I mean, if you're making a movie, if you're directing a movie, you know, essentially on a lower budget thing where you usually would have a producer and a director, let's just simplify things. As far as I'm concerned, you're partners in that. You know, I mean, when you're on set, it doesn't really matter who raised the money or who's going to supervise post or what. When you're there making a movie, you should be equal partners in that. And, you know, and by that same standard, you know, if they're not pulling their weight or they're making it hard on you, you have the right to call them out on that.
So if let's say a new director is in a similar situation and it's their first time experiencing that, and they've heard about this, that maybe they will be overthrown on their set. What's the best way to handle it and still kind of preserve their name?
I mean, if you've got people doing things behind the scenes that are trying to get somebody removed, which we've actually, just saying that made me think of another situation, not on something I directed, but something she and I both worked on, Josephina and I both worked on. That was definitely going on. Being set up to fail, I don't know. I think you just have to carry on until, you know, and especially if it's your first movie, your second movie or whatever, you're just trying to get some films completed and have a track record as a director. I think you need to try to keep it even keel as much as you possibly can. You know, because I do know a lot of people, by the same token, I know a lot of people who've made one movie and that's it. Because of, you know, whatever temperament issues or blowouts or things that didn't go well, and it just turned into such a fireball that was it for them. There's a lot of people like that too, you know, and they wanted to make more films, but they're not gonna, because it just blew up so much. So I think you have to try to keep a lid on it as much as you possibly can. I don't know. I think everyone has their own personal gauge of that.
Well, some people are great at being politicians and they know the game someone's playing and they can still just be smooth back and make sure and other people, I think, wear their heart on their sleeve, or they're just more like, no, I'm going to call BS when I see it. I'm just going to I was definitely not doing that. I mean, you know, you'd have a film like, you know, for example, I did a film, this was a problem with the DP, not with the producer, with the DP. Sometimes DPs can try to take over movies and be very bullying because they know they have the power, especially if they have their own camera package and everything. That can happen sometimes. And I did one movie where, you know, the DP was really pulling, you know, he was just making it clear that he was, you know, going to determine a lot of things about when we were going to start and stop and how much they're going to do and this and that. And I really kept my mouth shut through the entire process because I had a friend who had money in that film, you know, a personal friend. I had more or less some money in the movie at that point, and I really cared a lot about that movie and I wanted to preserve it and complete it. So a lot of times you will I was not wearing my heart on my sleeve for my first few years of directing. I think later on, I'll start to make more, you know, comment more on things that aren't working right or whatever, but. Yeah, it's interesting how managing egos is such like an important skill in adult life that no school really prepares you for that.
Well, you know, the best way to put it is like Josephina and I both say it's like on the movies we're doing now, we're in charge, but like you can say you're in charge, but at the end of the day, you're really trying to get the best out of everyone and work with everyone and do what's best for the movie. So really the movie's in charge. You know, and the movie's in charge. I mean, and that's the same with the one I just mentioned in the desert. I mean, what's really important? The movie. That's the most important thing. So is it about telling somebody to their face what you think about them, either privately or publicly? Or is it about completing the movie and then moving on to the next project? Because you can always do another movie and then you can work with somebody else next time. That's usually how you handle those type of situations. And we've both tried to become more and more diplomatic over time. We try to learn from our experiences and, you know, just, you know, kind of keep the diplomacy as much as you possibly can until it just absolutely is obviously not working. But even that's usually more of like a slow fade than a big explosion with most people, you know, so.
I like that. The movie's in charge.
It is. Really, it's the most important thing. And look, sometimes people do crazy things because of that. You know, sometimes people put their lives in danger and other people's lives in danger because of that. Directors get huge egos. The movie, I mean, I know, I see it from all different angles, and especially since we've been executive producing things lately, we are on the other side of the table. So we see it even more from that perspective, which is interesting. But yeah, the movie, ultimately, that does need to be the main thing everyone's working toward. And if some other people don't care about it and they're going to quit or they're going to, you know, do whatever, well, you know what, you still need to complete it and to the best of your ability. You still need to finish it, and for your own sake and for the film's sake, you know. So
relax, the movie's in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it really is, you know. And it's going to do what it's going to do later on too, you know. It's going to, every film's going to, you know, how hard you work on it, it's all going to have, they're all going to have their own path and their own success or lack of success or exposure or fandom or lack of interest or whatever. You just never know. You really never know. Anybody who says they know is lying, you know?
Yeah, and I know it's a very sort of dark place for anybody who completes something. I'm sure it's the same for a book as well, that like, okay, it's done, and now like the reactions are going to be what it's going to be, and then it can be a very dark place.
Oh yeah, I mean we're at that place right now. Not a dark place, thankfully, but we're in that place right now where we're getting our first reviews for our movie, High Def, and actually all of them have been good. They've all been pretty good. I'm not going to say they're all 4-star ratings, but we haven't gotten any bad reviews yet on the movie. And it's funny though, because the first review I ever got, or one of the first I ever got, was in a print magazine in Fangoria, and it was a very bad review, and it broke my heart. And at one level I was thrilled to be in the magazine, on another level I was upset because they hated the movie. And I think over time I've gotten more and more, like, I get less and less bothered by reviews. I think the more stuff you make, the more movies you have out there, and you know, the more, frankly, other things you do with your time, you will care less about that. I think, you know, every movie is going to have its fans and its detractors, and, you know, you will not find one movie that everybody loves, you know, and you find plenty of movies, especially in the horror genre, that people love or hate. So you get less bothered by that over time. But it is always a little bit of a suspense you're put in when your first reviews start rolling in, and you're like, oh, see what people think, you know.
If negative reviews don't bother you, what does bother you?
Just having a difficulty getting another film off the ground, that bothers me a whole lot more. Seeing the landscape shrink in terms of distribution opportunities, in terms of, you know, places that are interested in playing or screening independent movies, you know. I mean, what bothers me, like Netflix bothers me, you know, they bother me because they put video stores out of business, they put a lot of independents out of business, and they're just doing their own stuff. And I think they had that plan all along. I'm not a fan, I'm never gonna subscribe to them, and I'm never gonna be a fan of them. That bothers me. That bothers me a lot more than a bad review. Because the movie, like my movie Camp Blood, which was the first movie of mine to be released, like commercially released, third movie I directed, but first to be released, Fangoria hated it, gave it a terrible review, but it was very, very popular, not only here, but also in England, to the point where we did a sequel the next year. That's how popular it was. We did the third one a few years later. That franchise is still going. There's people who contact me all the time about those movies and how much they enjoyed them and love them and want me to sign them and this and that and the other. And they've become part of, like, especially the independent horror landscape. Well, what that goes to show you is don't take those reviews that seriously, because you never know. One critic doesn't like it, maybe somebody else does, and if people are interested in the movie and they like it and it strikes a chord with the fans, that matters way more to me than any reviewer, because I'm a fan and I want my movies to deliver for the fans too. You know, I want to make a movie like the one I'd like to see. So yeah, reviews don't bother me. I mean, and I think you can get very, like, what did I see? One person, there was a quote this other director said, the only reviews I care about are the good ones, you know, because it's true. You know, you can do that too. It's almost like maybe you shouldn't look at any of them then, you know, but you know, we're still going to look at our press because we're interested, you know. It's all, you know, whenever you have a new movie out. But like the last film we did, not this one that just came out, but the last one we did, High 8, we did it completely on a wing and a prayer, and we didn't care what anybody thought of it. I couldn't care less because the thing was so low budget and independent that nobody, I mean, I told everybody to make the movies. I said, don't worry about it. Just make something you want to make and don't worry about anyone likes or doesn't like. And you know what? People love that movie. It was embraced the way you couldn't buy the publicity. We were getting like page-length articles in magazines that I could never get them to do anything before, and they were doing on their own volition because they loved the movie. And the festivals that took it and the fans and everything, that's why we made a sequel, because this film was so embraced, but we did it without caring. You have to do that sometimes. You have to not care what people think or what you think people are going to like or not like, or what your last reviews for your last movie were. You really can't care about that. If you do, then you're just going to stop. You're just going to get frozen and just stop.
And that goes back to the Facebook group where you guys just all said you wanted to do fun stuff. Yeah,
exactly. Like one of the filmmakers, I remember a direct quote from him was, "Remember when this used to be fun?" Quote. And he was basically a guy my age, because some of the filmmakers are older than me. Some of the filmmakers involved with High 8, I grew up watching their movies.
Oh wow!
Like I was renting their stuff from the video store when I was in my teens or late teens. They're they're my heroes. And but the guy who said that, yeah, he really struck a chord. Remember when this used to be fun? Because we all remember when it used to be fun, when we were out shooting with our friends in the backyard with the High 8 camera or whatever camera we had, and we weren't worried about Netflix or Amazon or Blockbuster or what store used to have our movie but they closed, or who's going to take our film, who's not going to take our film, or what demographics say, or what magazine. We weren't thinking about any of that stuff back then. We're just making films. So you need to go back to that. We went back to that, and I think and everyone got it. The fans, they were like, this is like, feels like one of these old movies, and you know, it's got that free spirit, that creative spirit. So, you know, it just goes to show you that you never know. You just kind of follow. We really followed our instincts with that one, you know. So yeah, it could be risky or it could go nowhere, but we didn't care because we were like, well, we're not risking enough to worry about that, you know.
Why not pitch Netflix and get them to do an upcoming project?
I doubt I would ever get in the room with them. I mean, I'm just being honest. I don't know how I would get in the room with them. You know, it's weird in this business too, and this is the honest truth, is, you know, I'm not saying it was easy for the Duffer Brothers with Stranger Things, but it did probably help that they hadn't done a whole lot when they pitched that. What happens in this business is it's sort of a double-edged sword. Is, you know, if you start to do things and you have a track record and you made X number of movies, well, okay, that's great because it shows you can do this and you can do it. You've done it more than once, and obviously you've got some kind of, you know, track record skills and so on. But for some people, depending on the type of movies you make, and in my case it's horror movies, that's a stigma. It stigmatizes you, and then most people think that's all that they can do. That's all that guy knows how to do. I mean, and I just throw a name out there, Wes Craven, on a obviously way bigger level, you know, he struggled with that his entire career. That's why he made the movie with Meryl Streep, because he was tired of making horror. He wanted to make other things. Most horror directors want to make other types of movies. They just don't get to. George Romero had plenty of things he wanted to do, Wes Craven, things, they all do, John Carpenter, all of them. But they're generally not going to get it. And I'm talking about major people here. They're not going to get it because their track record says he makes this type of film. So my track record says I make these type of films, and I don't think that Netflix would care about that. I think they'd see that as a negative. Maybe if I'd only made one short, they might be interested in having a meeting with me. You know, a short that was very hot, let's just say, played at, you know, some major fest. And that doesn't mean that, and that's not because I don't have any ideas for things, or I don't have ideas that could be expanded to TV series. But yeah.
So, having, you know, been here in the 90s and then, you know, entering a new era where there's going to be younger people in charge, do you find they have a harder time telling you no than maybe Gen Xers or people in another decade where it seemed like it was okay to be a little more blunt, and now we're very sensitive and we're dancing into everybody's feelings, and nobody wants to tell anybody no, but then they're not telling you the truth because I'm seeing a lot of that, and sometimes maybe it's just better people just tell you no.
Well, yeah, I think there is a it's because of, so much online communication. There's the classic, no response, sort of the ghosting, or whatever that people do, where they just, if they don't want to, they want to move away from the situation or say no or whatever, they just won't do anything. I guess like no response is okay, whatever that is, I don't know. I mean, we're pretty straightforward with people. Like, we're very straightforward in auditions. We're very straightforward in meetings about, like, when we're interviewing crew. That doesn't mean that things aren't still going to come up later. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much you talk till you're blue in the face and impress something upon someone. They either aren't listening to you, or they've got an agenda, or they just decide that they've got another idea later on. That can all happen. You have to be prepared for that. We just try to be as straightforward as possible. What other people do, we can't really say. But if we get a bad vibe off of somebody, or a non-committal vibe or whatever, we just move on.
Oh, sure.
I mean, there's a lot of moving on you do in this business.
Absolutely.
A ton of it, too much. And sometimes it happens way quicker than you think it will. But that's something else you need to get used to if you're going to have a career, I think, on any level, is just used to change and new faces, and and kind of self-starting, and coming up with things like almost like every film is your first film. I'm sure you've heard that before. People say, I feel like every time, I've felt that way many times, that I'm trying to pitch something to some people and I'm going, why do I even have to do this? I've got over 20 features, because that's just how this business is. People, you always got to prove yourself to somebody in some way, some more than others, but
But knowing that, does it make it less stressful? Knowing that you have to self-start again, and then you just go, okay, I'm back here again.
It's annoying. I'll be honest with you, it's annoying, and of course, because there's other people that don't have to do that. So there are. On a higher tier, there are people who don't have to do that. But there's an alarming number of accomplished people who do. So that makes it a little bit easier to take, I guess, when you know that, some of your heroes still have to, put on a dog and pony show for investors or whatever. I don't know. We've tried to take things, try to be as calm as we can over time. That's one of the things that Josephine and I both tried to sort of learn with some of these experiences, is you can get very heated over these little situations sometimes with film. That's one thing I'd probably tell anybody, really, is a lot of times it's not as big a deal as you think it is. If it's an editing issue, if it's a sound issue, if it's a certain shot, believe me, it's not as big a deal as you think it is. Sometimes you can get very fixated on these type of things, and you can get very stressed about this stuff. It's not even about personality. Sometimes it's technical things too. You just try to be as calm as you can in those type of situations.
Which part of the screenwriting process is most difficult for you?
I would say the first draft is the most difficult. Looking at the blank page, Actually, the treatment, I always write a treatment before I write a script. And I know that sounds really elementary, but there are people I know who don't really do that. They just want to start writing and see what happens. I'm like, what's going to happen is you're going to have an unfinished script. You're going to get into the third of the way through and realize you don't have an ending, a middle or an ending, and you wasted your time. I've highly, highly, highly recommend writing the whole thing out as a treatment and make sure it works, and make sure it's a feature-length piece too. For me, treatments are always 1 page of treatment kind of equals like 10 pages of script. That's how my treatments have always worked out. So if I have if my treatment is at least 7 or 8 pages or 9 pages or something, then you probably don't have a whole movie there. But writing the first draft is always the hardest. And just, for me, the reason it is because I want to get everything right the first time. I don't want to do another draft. I want to get dot the I's and cross the T's and have the perfect adjectives picked out and the perfect cadence and all this kind of stuff. So I will kind of agonize over that. And sometimes you need to almost just be like, you know what? like if you come to a scene that isn't working that well, just almost like drop in I hate to say it, but like a space saver or something, you know, kind of like a little block, and then go to the next scene if you can, because then you can come back to that later, you know, and be more inspired. Maybe you'll be more inspired the next day, but just keep moving through it, you know. And I always write a certain number of pages per day, no matter what. That's another discipline thing I kind of picked up like after moving here, was because I had to sometimes write scripts very quickly. I had to like deliver scripts within a few weeks or a month or whatever it was. So I got a discipline from that. But that first draft is always the hardest, yeah. So much easier to rewrite than to write, you know.
Are you able to write at home, or do you have to go somewhere?
I have to write at home. Even if there's construction going on around and there's like whatever noise. I've written so many scripts under like bad, noisy circumstances, unfortunately, because I have to be at home and I have to be in my environment. Like, I'm not one of those people who can go in a coffee shop and write. I don't know how people do that with all the noise and kind of commotion and frankly, other people with laptops and stuff all around you who are probably also writing scripts. It's just kind of, you know, those type of environments don't work for me. So I've always written, like I tried to write a script one time at a friend's house. I was house sitting and I couldn't do it. I left. I called another friend up and I said, can you house sit for this guy? Because I can't stand it. I have to go home and be in my place and write my script. I can't write it here in his place. So yeah. So everything I've ever written has been at home, yeah.
So was that something you always did, was do the space saver?
I've done that more lately. It kind of depends on the script. Like sometimes if it's a script, especially if it's a script you're writing for someone else. Like I got this job to write a script about like a mummy movie for this guy one time. And it was like a mummy on we were calling it Mummy on Campus for a while, but that wasn't the title we ended up with, but it was a mummy film on a college campus. And there were some scenes where I was like, yeah, I know exactly what I want to do with that. You know, I'm going through the treatment. And then there'd be like a part where I'd be like, you know what, I just don't feel like writing that right now. You know, like some action scene or some kind of complicated sequence. It was my fault because I came up with it anyway. But I would just skip over to the next scene and then I'd come back to that one. So, you know, everybody has their own way of, their own writing technique, I guess. And so I'll do that sometimes. It depends.
And so then could you work that out later? Like, you know what, you're waking up and you're like, I just figured out the best way to like have the mummy be in the campus square or whatever.
Yeah, a placeholder. Yeah, you put a placeholder there. Or it might be, for me sometimes, I don't have a hard time writing action. I'm not a big fan of writing dialogue. That's something I don't like. And the directors who I'm a big fan of are not dialogue-oriented directors. Like Walter Hill is one of my favorites. And, you know, he's always got real short lines. The characters don't yak a lot in his movies. So sometimes it'll come to a certain scene, like it could be a big dialogue scene or something, and I'll be like, you know what, depends on where you're at in the day, but I'll be like, I think I'll come back to that tomorrow. Or you'll just write some dialogue, and then you'll come back to it and rewrite, polish it, you know. So, I mean, to me, a first draft is always like, there's a bunch of polishing that goes on in that draft. It's not just a first draft like, oh, here it is done, and I just fell right off the table, and here it is, you know. There's always a certain amount of polishing that you do, you know. And it kind of depends on whether you're writing it for yourself or if you're writing for someone else, because sometimes when you're writing for a producer or some company, you know that they're going to make a lot of changes to it anyway, and you've been having meetings and you've seen that stuff happening. So that sort of plays into your decisions sometimes too, to, you know, how you approach it, you know.
The guy that saw you in the horror shirts that was picking up the trash at the, on by the craft services table or whatever, was that was your first rewrite or sort of?
Yeah, it was my first rewrite because he had the script. I still remember what it was called. It was called Queen of Angels, and it was I think it was a ghost movie in a hospital, like in a haunted hospital, and he even knew where he wanted to film it. There's a hospital called Linda Vista Hospital that's like been a location for many years for all kinds of movies. And I think we might have filmed there on that show. I can't remember, but anyway, that's what it was. And you know, I don't remember though the details of what I did on it. Like I don't remember what he wanted me to do with it. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't like it was unfinished. I mean, it was a completed script. I think he just wanted me to maybe like make it scarier. I've had people tell me that before, make it scarier. Okay. Different people think different things are scary, so.
That's true. So you kind of like, you go through the initial read with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I would read it. I think on that one I read it, and then maybe there were certain scenes he wanted me to like pump up a bit, like the horror scenes. Maybe he wasn't that comfortable with the horror scenes. Geez, you know, I don't remember now, but it was, you know, but he did have a finished script, which I've had other jobs where people call me up. I had one gig where a guy called me up to finish his script and not only finish it, but write around scenes he had already shot for the movie. So he had like a script. Some of those scenes that were in the script had already been filmed like years ago. And I was supposed to write the rest of it, like kind of like I guess for lack of a better term, he had the beginning and I had to write the middle and the ending. So I did it. But that was weird because not only did I have to match his first act, let's say, I also had to match clips that were shot like in, you know, with these different actresses that were already existing footage, which, you know, for me, I was thinking to myself, or how are you going to match that footage in terms of the shooting? Then you start thinking about the technical end of it and the production end of it. But I was like, whatever. So I wrote that.
I was just wondering how valuable that one experience where you meet this guy in the most unlikely situation, that's your first job in a sense, which is so cool. And maybe because it was a relaxed thing like that, it actually helped you more than if it was like, well, yeah, come on in, and then you feel this immense pressure.
Oh yeah, no, it was done very casually. Literally, he was literally picking up the trash while he was asking me to do it. And I remember that. And you know, I mean, I just thought that was very flattering, and I couldn't believe it. You know, I thought I was the luckiest guy in the world, you know, to get to do that. And I was nervous. I remember we went over to their offices, because I was like, wow, I'm in the offices of these, you know, this established film company, because he knew those guys. He knew the producers over there, and probably he was trying to push the Queen of Angels on them. But yeah, it was cool that it was done so casually, and some of the subsequent jobs I did too were also casual, and they were very kind of off the cuff, like, you know, just like this guy at this effects shop saying, hey, I've got some guys looking for a script, and do you have anything? And I'm like, yeah, I've got this horror action script, you know, that I wrote on spec that I planned on making in Virginia Beach, which did not happen, but I had it, and they optioned it from me. You know, and that was once again done in a very casual, laid back. I think I met with them in like a Starbucks or something, and, you know, drew up a short form agreement. So,
yeah, I was just wondering how like some people might pass over certain opportunities because it's not like this huge like Hollywood, what you envision, but how that actually groomed you to then, I mean, you took those opportunities, you saw them maybe as like, okay, I'll do it, and then realizing.
It's all about, you know, a lot of this business is built on give and take, and, you know, sort of, you know, people doing favors for each other and helping each other out in different points in time. And I had done work, talking about the option job, I had done work for that effects shop. I knew them from that background. They helped me out with effects people I needed for my stuff that I was directing. They helped me out with that, with the option thing. Then later on, they had a script that I did like a little rewrite on. So it was always this kind of, you know, we're just hanging out. I mean, this did not feel like business. You know, it was, but it wasn't. You know, it felt more. And I wasn't remotely thinking about, oh, this stuff I'm too good for this stuff. I never thought that. I thought it was cool and fun, and, you know, I was having fun, frankly. So, you know. And I was learning a lot too, sometimes without even realizing it. Every job you get, you learn from. Every script you write, every movie you produce or direct, or whether you instigate it and bring it up from the ground up, or you get brought in on it. I mean, you learn on every single one, you know?
Maybe that was it, what you just said. You didn't think you were too good for it, and maybe just seeing that opportunity. Seems like, do you think everybody does that? There's
definitely movies I've directed, like, and so, you know, I'll tell you something. There were people, when I first started directing very low budget, micro budget movies, who made fun of me. There were friends of mine who were my age who were trying to get in as well, and they would make fun of me. They would make fun of everything about what I was doing. They make fun of the films I was directing. They make fun of the producer on those. They make fun of everything. Guess what? They didn't direct anything, and they never did. They just made fun of me and tried to denigrate what I was doing. And some of those people, I just cut them loose, to be honest with you. That was one of my first things I kind of learned out here was not only how to build relationships, but also how to get rid of negative dead weight sometimes too. And there's a lot of people that will scoff at things or say, I would never do that. It's like, yeah, don't worry, you won't,
Right.
Like I had a guy who used to say, I would never do a movie for so-and-so. I'd say, yeah, you won't, because he's not going to ask you to. It's easy to say what you won't do, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm not big on turning things down, There's a few movies I've directed that I'm not very happy with or whatever, but, overall, for me, it's hard to take those pieces out of the puzzle because everything leads to, each project sort of leads to the next one. It would be very, very hard for me to just take them all apart and, separate all my work, to separate all my credits or all my, off my resume, because there's a line that kind of goes through all of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Usually one thing leads to another. Usually one job does lead to another. And sometimes you have to self-start and create your own job, create your own opportunity. That too. But yeah, sitting around saying I'm too good for that or I'm not going to do that, and that's not going to get you anywhere.
Right, yeah, it's just interesting how all that kind of just then led, and some people would have said, oh, this guy, yeah, I'm not going to,
oh, yeah,
judge him or
I had
whatever.
friends from film school who moved out here who would make fun of, literally make fun of things, that people I was working with, and make fun of stuff. And I was kind of like, you know what, it's okay. Just go do whatever you're doing. And, it's all right. You don't have to do it. You don't have to be on this project, It's, I don't know. People have a snobism about them, and I haven't seen that getting anybody anywhere, though. And all the directors I know who are working for years and making things, and however they're making them, whatever, they're all self-starters, and they're not snobs, and they're not, they're all hard workers, and they all love what they do. And they've all taken a lot of abuse or grief or had a lot of difficulties over the years, but they still do it. So, I think you kind of make a decision early on in this business is you're going to continue with it or not. Because if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to take these lumps, then just get out of it. Because there's a lot easier things you could be doing, a lot more profitable, a lot easier things you could be doing with your life, But I don't feel like I chose it. I feel like it chose me. I do. So.
And some people are like, I had no idea if there was anything else I wanted to do. This was interesting, but
yeah, I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing. I love writing. I sometimes that's my, but that's all bound up in the film too. So I do journalism things here and there, but you know what I mean. It's still all connected. So.
Okay, so I have a quote here. Sykes' film Death Factory became its distributor's all-time top-grossing title, and was also later sequelized. How much money is that? 6 figures? 7 figures?
I will never know the answer to that question because I'm not privy to that type of thing. When we made Death Factory, it was like a work-for-hire situation, and for this distributor who had distributed movies that I directed prior to that and done well with, and he started his own company called Brain Damage Films. And Death Factory was one of their first movies that they paid for. This is what distributors were doing back then. A lot of, especially smaller companies, they were doing well enough that they would produce their own product. They would produce their own films that they could own outright, and then they would, use their distribution, arm to get them into the stores and stuff. So that's what Death Factory was. And I felt like it was going to be a good movie when we made it, but then it turned out to not only turn out pretty well, but it also was very successful. It got into Blockbuster. It was my first movie in Blockbuster. It was, that was really cool to see it. And it got some good reviews too. It was well received, in the horror community. And that was pretty much the end of that. I keep hearing from people about it, and it was released all over the world too. Death Factory was released in UK, Germany, Poland, Russia, France, everywhere. Pretty much every country you can think of, And they did do a sequel, but I was not involved in the sequel. I don't know how much you want to hear about that, but I can tell you things if you want to hear them. It was actually, I knew it was the best-selling title because that was in a magazine. That quote was in a magazine. I saw an interview with the distributor, and he said, "This Death Factory is our best-selling title." And then a few years after that, I was at a film market and in Santa Monica, and they had all these rooms they take over, and I went up to the room. I was kind of doing my rounds at the time, and I went in the room, Brain Damage's room, and I'm talking to the president, and I'm looking around the room, and I had just made a movie called Plaguers, which is a pretty big movie, bigger than anything they've ever done. And they probably weren't thrilled with me because I hadn't given it to them to distribute. But I'm looking around the room, and I see a poster for Death Factory sequel, Death Factory Bloodletting, it was called. And I was like, "Hey, I see you made a sequel to Death Factory, great, that's good to know." And basically what happened with that was there was a guy over there at the company who was a very power-hungry younger guy who they're going to make that sequel, but he didn't want anybody who was involved with the first one involved with that. Why would you want them, right? They're just the people that made the movie that made you all the money. So they made the movie there. They're in Arizona. They made the movie there with people that were local. They didn't bring anybody from LA onto that. And they never asked me even if I wanted to even contribute like to the screenplay. And I had to fight to even get my credit on there as characters based on characters created by, which is a standard credit you see on any sequel or, any Indiana Jones movie or whatever, that's been franchised out. I had to fight for that credit, and they kind of gave it to me, kind of. They gave me like a reduced version of that, if you can imagine that. So, and that one didn't do as well as the first one. It came out, but it was like almost like a non-event. So that's the kind of thing that can happen in this business. Sometimes when you make a successful movie, most people would automatically assume that you would be brought on to the sequel, or they would want you on the sequel or something like that. But in that case, it was because of the power dynamics that were going on behind the scenes that neither me nor the producer of the original Death Factory were involved.
And if you hadn't have gone to that film market and been up there making your rounds, you may have never discovered that, right?
Oh, I would have discovered it.
You would have.
Somebody would have told me, some fan or somebody would have told me, or I would have maybe seen the movie for sale somewhere or something like that. But it was weird when it came out because that sequel, they didn't release it themselves, which I thought was weird because they're a distributor. They gave it to somebody else, and then it just didn't go anywhere, which I was like, well, you know what? It's fine with me. I mean, I wasn't really in the cheering section for that project. All it did was just prove that I had made another movie that did well enough to sequelize. Camp Blood was one, Death Factory is another one, and now we've got sequel to High 8 also. So, it gives you some kind of makes you feel like you have your a line on something, creatively speaking, to be able to come up with some concepts that are popular enough to have people want to sequelize them, and because that doesn't happen with every movie, obviously.
Is that something going forward when you have things put in contracts that if they decide to make the sequel, then that you have to somehow either be credited, involved? Because was that something you didn't think was ever going to happen?
Well, it's funny, when we made Death Factory, I'd already done a sequel to Camp Blood. So obviously I was already in that, I'd already had things sequelized. But, it's one of those things where the contracts back then were such like short form things, and there was always that looming threat of, if you don't want to do this, someone else can do it, and believe me, they didn't mind telling you that, So when I made the movie, but I didn't think there would be a sequel to Death Factory, but then again, I didn't think there'd be a sequel to Camp Blood either. So I didn't have any kind of a clause. Now, future things that we've done since then, especially things that we do through Nightfall, we do have more clauses in those type of agreements, and with whether it's initial production agreements or it's with distributors, with things like that. In terms of we really go over these contracts and really make sure we look at every single right that we're signing off on, because all of these rights matter, and more now than ever, I would say. And if there's a right that they don't want, well, we'll retain it. And if there's a right that we really think we need to keep, then we'll argue for it and keep it. You know, that's something, frankly, that Josephine is more adept at than me. You know, we both look at the contracts, but she's in favor of protecting me, actually, and trying to get us the best deals and the best agreements and protect ourselves too for like future, you know, sequels or renewals. You know, you have sometimes with, you know, relicensing, this type of stuff. So we're, you know, it's always a learning process. Everybody's always learning, and most filmmakers, they make bad deals and things like that in their first films because they just want to get the movie released, and you know. Right,
I guess because there's that hunger, and it is true that there's people that will take your place if you don't.
Oh yeah, and I've had that happen to me. I mean, I've had movies that I had one film for this same producer where I just basically I stepped off of it because I said, you know, it collapsed. I won't get into the details, but it collapsed after I'd done a ton of work on it, and I said to him, you know what, I can't rebuild this whole movie again, like in terms of rescheduling, reproducing almost the whole movie. And then he said, okay, fine. And then he went and just got somebody else to direct it. And, you know, it wasn't anything great. It wasn't anything special. It's not like something, oh, I wish I'd done that because that movie turned out to be a huge hit. And no, not hardly. But that type of thing can happen to you anytime. Even on these tiny films. People think that stuff happens on big studio movies. People look, well, yeah, it does. I mean, it's people lurking around. It happens on low-budget films all the time. You know, in fact, it might even happen more because there are more people that are angling to get up the ladder quicker. Whereas on studio film, like a Paramount film, the grip is probably okay with being a grip. You know, the guy who's doing craft services, he's probably cool with that. He's doing pretty well with that, and he's probably all right with it. He doesn't want to direct the movie, you know, or any movie. Whereas I feel like on these smaller films, that's the downside to the low budget, is everybody's kind of like angling to bump up the ladder. So, you know, I've had, you know, effects people want to direct, and, you know, DP wants to direct. There's always, you know, I'm not saying that's on every set, but it does happen. So, you know, and when it happens to you, it actually really happens to you, then you really become aware of it, you know.
Yeah, that's the interesting part about the entertainment industry, that's that angling. I like that.
Yeah, they're angling, and I mean, we've even had on, I mean, you know, it happens on every film.
Yeah, in a lot of scenarios. And so I think it's just being aware of that. Yeah. And then sort of like, okay, I'm feeling that there's an angling, but I'm not sure what it is. And then just being ready to be protective.
Yeah, but that was one of those situations you mentioned earlier. Did I speak up? Did I say what I thought? Oh, yeah, I did. Because that was toward the end of my working relationship with that guy. And I did tell him, in no uncertain terms, I'm not rescheduling this entire film and bringing all these people and everything on, you know, because they have schedules too, believe it or not. Everybody has schedules. And I was not going to redo the whole film just because one person didn't show up, and then the whole thing started falling like a house of cards. Sometimes these movies are very fragile things, and they're fragile for us. I mean, it's always scary, you know, shooting, especially on lower budget things. It's always scary there's always a little bit of terror involved because everything needs to come together right then and there for it to really work. So there's always a lot of stress. I don't care how many movies you made, you know, the day before. The night before. You don't get a lot of sleep.
Yeah, that's true. And then you have to be up so early, and then you're like a mess for that one day. And then
we were like the last thing, like on High Death, we shot at Bronson Caves, and you know that's all outdoors. Obviously, a whole day we're going to be outdoors, and if you have weather issues, that's it. You're not going to shoot. And we had everything prepped. So the night before, literally at like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, we started hearing rain. There was like unforecast rain coming down, and it was like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and I'm like, this day is screwed. But luckily, by the time we actually got out there, which was pretty early in the morning, still probably 6 or 7 a.m., it had stopped raining, and it was starting to dry off a little bit. But, you know, those type of things can drive you nuts. I mean, when you shoot outdoors, weather is like, sometimes you can save a lot of money by shooting outdoors, but the downside is if you have inclement weather or other noise issues or things, it can really bite you, you know.
Are the distribution deals better now than when you first started out?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because distribution deals when I first started were built largely on foreign sales, for one thing. Another thing they were patterned or built on was, the infrastructure, the retail and rental infrastructure we have here. So, you could take a given movie, like, say, Camp Blood, and that movie sold so well internationally. Forget about, it hadn't even come out in the US. It sold so well internationally that the foreign sales company was handling it, commissioned us, and paid for a sequel right then and there, because they had done so well with just selling it to what UK had paid, for example, let alone other countries that bought it. So, and then the movie, had a, second and third life, not just overseas, but here, of course, and for rent and, DVD sales and all this kind of stuff. Those markets, they're not really there anymore for lower budget movies and all kinds of things. They're, foreign sales have been devastated by piracy to a large degree. It's very hard to, sell to Spain, for example, because they pirate everything over there before it's come out. So you can forget about that. There's just, the countries that do buy are pickier about what they buy. They don't buy as many movies. In the US, you don't have video stores really anymore, and you don't have as many places to sell movies except online. So a lot of that infrastructure is just not there anymore. What you have in place is Amazon, and you've got sales through some sites, and then you've got streaming. Well, streaming is a poor replacement for, especially in monetary terms, it's definitely a poor replacement for foreign sales and video stores, rentals and sales. It's just not the same thing. I mean, you make very, very little on each view, each turn that a movie makes on a streaming site, especially after the distributor has recouped costs and everything. But it's not even about that. It just, nobody makes a lot on those turns. Everybody's got all these, because these chains, whether it's Amazon or it's iTunes or it's Walmart, I mean, they're dictating the terms. Now, it used to be the only one you had to worry about dictating terms so much was Blockbuster. Well, they're gone now. But now everybody's dictating terms, and everybody's got their hand in, and everybody's charging against things. And, so it's very difficult. It's not what it used to be. You have to find unique ways to get your movie out there, get it in front of people, and make them want to buy it. One thing that we didn't really do this it wasn't really planned, but it worked well for the project. Our last two movies, for example, have come out on VHS. Now, some people could say, why in the world do you want to put a movie on VHS? They don't make that anymore for 13, 14 years now. Well, because there are collectors who collect, especially horror VHS, and they are interested in VHS releases of certain new horror movies. Not all of them, but certain ones, especially because we have a retro thing going for us with retro directors who've had movies released on VHS back in the day. So we've got kind of a cool retro, kind of like vinyl. It's sort of the movie equivalent of vinyl. It's cool. It's practically, maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's a cool collectible. It has different artwork on it. Sometimes they're limited editions, so there's only so many that are going to get made. And it's just, cool to put on the shelf, and especially if you're a fan of a certain director's work or you just like independent horror movies. So that's one of the ways we've, kind of been able to skin the cat in that respect. But it's very difficult. We're also, putting movies on Blu-ray. We're starting, we get some sales off of that. Some people are very, once again, collectors. For the opposite end of the spectrum, Blu-ray collectors who want everything on Blu-ray. DVD's almost like in the middle. We do that too, but Blu-ray and VHS have unique collectability. But those are, we're always trying to find new ways to kind of get the movie in front of people. And thankfully, there are more festivals now than there used to be. There's more public screening opportunities than there used to be. And so that's a great way to build buzz for your movie and get the word out and get people excited about it and things like that. We've been doing a lot of that. Kind of the grassroots, because these are very grassroots films. We supervise them here in LA, and we shoot part of it here in LA, but they're shot all over the country. So there's a lot of support, actually more than there is here, I would say. There's a lot of support for horror in other states, other parts of the US, and people will do we've had drive-in screenings for our movies. We've had, all kinds of cool, things like that. And not only here, but in Europe also. But, I think that there's not as many places to physically get movies from anymore, but there are more ways to, people are almost opening up more avenues to screen them and have public screenings and outdoor screenings and stuff like that. So but yeah, it's I'll tell you though, at the same time, distribution's gotten harder, but in making money off of it has definitely gotten harder, but it's really never been easy. And if you're in it for that alone and you're focusing only on that, then you're probably in the wrong business. There has to be more to it than there has to be more to it in terms of why you're doing it than just for that. But yeah, I've seen a lot of changes in the distribution over the years, for sure.
And with theatrical, do you just do like a one-night screening for cast and crew, and then you don't really use that as your model?
We've done things like that, yeah. We've done kind of like four-walling or find a cool venue, that's open to indie film. Like we found a cool venue around here called Zebulon that's like in Frogtown. It's like a music venue that does movie screenings too, and they love film. And they have great audio, great acoustics and the screen and everything. So we did our premiere over there.
Frogtown, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm
it's
not privy to that.
Like Los Feliz area.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, Frogtown.
Oh my gosh, I've been here for 20 plus years.
Well, it's always been there. It's more in the press now than it used to be. It's not like there were years where I didn't, anyway, but that's where we did our thing.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll try, and then, the other filmmakers will do local premieres too, because we've got, let's say 4 or 5 other directors, they'll do local premieres, they'll do different things. So that's one of the cool things about these anthology films too, is that you can almost create like a web that expands beyond the LA base. You can kind of go, you can have screenings in New Jersey, you can have screenings in Kentucky, you can have screening in, different places, because everybody's got connections to different venues where they live and, where they work. So, and that's what a lot of people are doing nowadays. They're just trying to find interesting angles to approach distribution and, getting the word out for your movie.
Okay, let's say we're going to go back to your high school, Virginia Beach, and you are going to have a 5-minute powwow with some students on the first steps of making a movie. What would you tell them?
When I was making shorts with my friends when I was 17, 18, I was having fun. I mean, it was work, but you don't think of it that way. Nobody did, I don't think. So you should have fun, and you should, think of an idea or something that means something to you personally that's different, not just because a lot of young filmmakers, they just imitate other movies that they've seen. They do their own version of that, and I did things like that too. Sure. But I think if you're going to really put some effort into something nowadays, maybe try to think of an idea, a storyline, a little short story that has some kind of meaning to you personally. It doesn't have to be the most biggest heavy theme in the world, but just something that means something to you. And also try to do something simple and start off with something simple, because if you try to do a bigger thing right off the bat, it's gonna, it could turn into a mess. So I think, and usually the really good short films, the best ones, I'm talking about the top of the, they're usually fairly simple with not too many characters and a fairly straightforward story and some kind of a surprise at the end, some kind of a twist at the end, that kind of stays in your mind. So those are some of the things I would say. I mean, I just think but I think you should have fun doing it. I think that's very important. Don't worry too much about the technical aspect of it. I think you will learn that over time if you're serious about it. And you might even have other people doing those jobs. But initially, I think you should just think more about conveying something original. Idea-wise, I would say.
And then would it be the same if it was for features? Let's say you're speaking to a group of high school students who've been making short films since they were 8. Mm-hmm. And so now they're ready to make this leap. Uh-huh. Would it be the same? Or any other advice?
Geez, it's funny. I mean, the first feature I did, I was 17 when I directed. It was a vampire hitman movie called Bad Blood. And it was just so influenced by, John Woo's The Killer and, probably some horror movies I was watching at the time. And so it wasn't the most original thing in the world. And it was we were definitely biting off a lot more than we could chew. We had all these big action scenes and effects and stuff. So it would be tough for me to tell people don't do that. It would be tough for me to tell people don't be ambitious with your feature. Because, I don't know, I feel like a lot of major filmmakers who start off making shorts and things like that, they were pretty ambitious with their projects. So I don't know. I mean, I think it does just boil down like the short film. It kind of boils down to coming up with an idea that you're really passionate about and a story you're really passionate about and something you feel realistically you can achieve, with your resources that you have. But it's always good to push a little bit more beyond that. Like, I still do that now. Like, anytime I come up with an idea for something I want to make, I always think to myself, okay, what resources do we have? Okay, great. Now let's push another 10%, another 20%. How much percent we can push it. Because I feel like if you're not doing that, then you're not challenging yourself enough. You're not to me, that's the excitement. Is always pushing a bit beyond your budget, beyond your resources. Because then you come up with cool, creative things sometimes, like cool, creative solutions for those things. Do you know what I mean? That's what I would say.
Interesting, because do you think, has it always been in you to not play it safe, or were you always groomed to play it safe?
I might have been groomed to play it safe, but I don't think I did. I mean, if I did, I wouldn't make any movies. I wouldn't pick up a camera and even bother with it. And because these things were definitely not safe. I mean, sometimes there were literal safety issues, with where we're, trying to do gunfights and we're setting off firecrackers, using firecrackers as squibs. And, we got, taken home by the cops more than a few times, we're filming these things and kicked out of locations. And we didn't get arrested or booked, but just close to that, as close as you can get to that. So no, I was definitely not playing it safe. And I've always had this mentality, and sometimes it's got me into trouble, where I'll go into something that's very low budget, and in my mind, it's some big $100 million movie. Like my mind, I'll be making a movie for $1 million movie, and my mind is like Aliens, or something that's $100 million. Why can't we just do that? Why can't we just do that stuff? Well, because we don't have the money. I don't want to hear that. I just want to try to do something with that level of intensity and everything. So it's I've always kind of been like that. I always kind of push beyond the boundaries, I think, in terms of the resources and stuff. To me, that's the fun of it,
And going back to Paul Schrader, I know we were just having fun talking about it off camera, but you had something to say about just his work and being appreciated.
Well, I think I'm a huge Paul Schrader fan. I've been a fan since I discovered his work while I was in film school. And I'm a fan of not just the movies he's written, but the movies he's directed, which are the ones that people, I think, really need to see. The First Reformed, he got his first Oscar nomination for First Reformed this past, Oscars, and he didn't win, but I was number one surprised that was the first Oscar nomination he'd ever received, for considering he's written, movies like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. I consider myself a Schrader expert, and I thought he had at least been nominated for those movies. My point, though, where I was thinking, was this thing about First Reformed, which was on a lot of critics' top 10 lists and all that, is you can never really count anybody out. Paul Schrader is someone who I think has been counted out more than once in his career. I think he's been, I don't want to say the butt of jokes, but I think he's definitely been, downgraded, not really appreciated as a filmmaker. And even recently, especially, with some of the stuff that he directed. And I think it's just great that he made that film. It's very much of a Schrader film. It's a very pure Schrader movie. And even if I didn't like it as much as some of his other work, I still just was so happy to see that. And I think it just proves that nobody's ever out. No filmmaker is ever retired or done, because you never know what they might come up with next.
That's a good point.
So that's what and that's really what I thought. I mean, and other people did too,
And when you had friends that went to film school that kind of said, like, I wouldn't do that, or don't do that, or that's stupid, or why would you Was that sort of in your mind, just seeing how someone's work or someone can be doubted at first and underappreciated? Do you think you...
I think I've reached the point, because I've been directing now for 20 plus years. I've reached the point that, you know, I've had my own ups and downs, just like a lot of other filmmakers, and it gives you a perspective on things, and you are more understanding of those type of like ups and downs and shifts that every filmmaker has in their career. So, like the thing with Schrader, you know, to me it was just sort of like a nice proof. It happens with actors a lot sometimes, but you don't see it as much with like directors or writers. You know, sometimes you know what I mean? That kind of thing, that kind of rebirth or that kind of revitalized thing. Sometimes you'll, you know, see that. But no, I don't know. I just think that I'm not regretful of anything. You know what I mean? I think it's easier for people to make fun of stuff sometimes when they're not doing it or whatever. It's always easier to not make a movie than to make a movie. you know?
And it's interesting how the crowd can turn on somebody who can have like 3 great movies in a row, and man, they do one movie. It's not even that it's like a horrible subject matter, and then people are so angry at that.
Well, two of my favorite directors, William Friedkin and Peter Bogdanovich, that's exactly what happened to both of them. I mean, Friedkin on an even bigger level, because he had, you know, French Connection, The Exorcist, and, you know, you don't get bigger and more popular than those films. Then he did Sorcerer, which everyone just loved to hate, even though it's not a bad film. In fact, I think it's his best film. And a lot of people have come around, and he considers it his best film too, by the way. A lot of people consider that his best work, or definitely one of his best movies. And I think people are just looking for him to fail. Like, they're kind of wanting him to fail at that point. Like, okay, buddy, you've had your turn. You're done now. You know, that's how I perceived it. Bogdanovich is the same with, you know, with Last Picture Show and What's Up, Doc, and all that. And then he, you know, they couldn't wait to sort of, you know, have this big downward. And I'm not saying that everything they directed was brilliant, but there is a tendency, to kind of like put somebody way up on a pedestal and then tear them down, way lower than they deserved, you know.
Yeah, it seems like that's part of almost some career paths, and then there's a rebuilding and a rebirth, but it has to be like years later.
Different people. I mean, like, you know, like I was mentioning Friedkin, he's another one that, you know, some of the films he's made lately, and I think he's in his 80s now, or late 70s or 80s, are some of his best films. I mean, I thought Bug was a tremendous movie, and it's a very small movie, you know, and I thought Killer Joe was really good. And these are like recent films that he directed. And he's had a lot of peaks and valleys. I actually find filmmakers like that a lot more interesting than like directors like, people like Spielberg, who are pretty much coasting along. And yeah, sure, he's got some ups and downs, but like, he's never been vilified the way some of these other filmmakers we're talking about. And, you know, he's never had probably such box office, you know, losses and you know, incredible. And he's never worked on such a small level either, like a movie like Bug or Killer Joe or something like that, you know? So I find directors like that more interesting, I think. A lot of my favorite filmmakers are kind of eccentric, and they're not mainstream necessarily. Very few actually are mainstream, you know.
Let's suppose you were going to retire from filmmaking and you would never make another movie again. You'd have 1 month to plan it out, this retirement, this exit from filmmaking. How would you spend that last month? What would you be doing? It would be your last month to ever think about making a movie.
I mean, it's simply just the obvious answer, but I would probably want to shoot the film that we're planning right now. I mean, it's because it's in my mind right now that we're doing for this next film, for this next anthology film, because it's written and it's in pre-production right now. So we might be able to do it in a month. And if I didn't make that, I'd probably go out to the desert and make some kind of improv road movie of some kind, because that's something I really love, and I love that environment. I love those type of films, and I just probably grab some actors, some people who seem cool, and just go out there and do like a Rain People or Two Lane Blacktop type film, just driving around the Salton Sea or something like that, and just, just make that my big finale. That's the first thing that comes to me.
So you wouldn't overthink it because you wouldn't have time.
I wouldn't want to. No, I wouldn't want to overthink it. I've had so many films where I had like almost no prep or crazy prep, and I just went and did it, and things were happening all around me, and I'm like reacting to all these circumstances. So I'm not afraid to do that. In fact, the thing I like about the films we've done lately is that there is an aspect of playfulness about them, where you don't overthink too much, and you feel like you're going back to your roots. So I'm still in that mode. I'm glad to be in that mode because I was in another kind of mode for a while, and it's fun to just sort of be more in a mode where you feel like there's no safety net and you're just, making something you're passionate about, and you're not that worried about what people are going to think about it, whether they like it or don't like it, or it's going to sell to this territory or that territory, and you're just out there doing it. So I'd have no problem doing that. I would spend the whole month shooting that movie. The longest schedule I ever had.
You just grabbed like a couple actors, a car.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we did. Like when we did this short called The Scout for High 8, I always just wanted to shoot. It was based on location. I thought location was first. A lot of times location is very, very important in a movie for me. Movies I like and the movies I make. And I'm like, that it's going to be in the desert. It's going to be two people, a guy and a girl, and we'll figure out what the story's going to be. It's going to end badly. And that's it, and we figured out the script. So I have no problem doing something like that. I've always been inspired by The Rain People, that Coppola film, where he took James Caan and Duvall and Shirley Knight out on the road, and they just literally traveled with them through the United States, through a bunch of different states, and they had some kind of a script, but they responded to things that were going on in the environments, the different towns they went through, and that found its way into the film. I've always thought that was such a cool model to make a movie on, and it's, so I would love to do something like that.
Plus, you coming to LA was its own road trip.
Yeah, it was, and I wrote a treatment for back then, right when I first moved out here, I actually wrote a treatment for a youth-oriented kids coming to LA to make it a movie called The Open Road. And, I messed around with that for a while. I never wrote the screenplay, but I did have it. I still have the treatment for it. I don't know if I'd want to make that or make something different, but I've always wanted to do those type of things. Before I got involved in the whole horror scene, the scripts I was writing were not horror movies. They, might have had weird or dark elements, but they weren't horror films. So
I'd like to see that movie.
It might happen. Stranger things have happened.
A lot of people have had the moving to LA in their car.
Yeah, that's what it was. It's like a group of friends, and based on people I knew, other transplants I knew when I first moved here. They were also from Virginia, but they didn't come here with me. It was weird. I would start meeting people who were from Virginia. Some of them had been out here for a little while. Some of them had been here or just got here on the same time I did. And a few of them were even from Virginia Beach. And so, like, I had a DP I worked with for years who was from Virginia, and these actors, and they're all the people I worked with in my early films, like in my first 3 or 4 movies, So I based the characters and the treatment on them back then.
And does it have a happy ending? That first.
God, I'm trying to remember how that ends. I don't remember how that treatment ends, but probably not, knowing me. Probably everybody dies in a hail of gunfire or something.
While going to like an audition or something?
I think they separate. I think they all kind of go their separate paths, which frankly is how it goes in real life, to be honest. I mean, that's actually realistically how life is. So without knowing that, really, I was writing about something I didn't really know a lot about, but it did that is kind of how it goes.
Do they still keep in touch?
Not really. Some people are just like, I kind of know about them, but I don't really talk to them anymore. And some, I don't know what happened to them. Like, they might as well fall off the face of the earth. Like, no digital footprint, no nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, and things like that happen, and it's not like of course, the normal response is to think maybe did I say something? Did it something I did? No, it's not. Everybody's got their own inner thing going on that you don't even know about, no matter how well you know them. And this business can do strange things to people's minds sometimes. So you have to contend with that and sort of make peace with that, as you continue.
I still want to see the movie now. I hope you make it.
Makes me want to dig up the script. I've probably got it somewhere. I think I might have typed it up. I used to handwrite everything. I didn't start typing my scripts up until I didn't even use Final Draft until movie number 5 or 6. I used to even type them literally and move, I don't think anyone wants to hear this, but I used to, really bump the cursor. I mean, it was ridiculous in Word, but I used to handwrite everything for a long time, for years and years. Everything had to be handwritten first, then typed up. But I don't do that. I know there's some writers that do that. I think Tarantino does that. I think I read. He still does that.
Okay.
I think it's cool when people do that. I just personally don't have the luxury. I can't. Yeah, my hand starts to cramp up.
Yeah.
My hand starts to cramp up after a while, and
bad anyway, but nowadays it's even worse.
yeah, but I did used to handwrite my first 2 features I know, or first 3 or 4 really, 5 maybe, they were all handwritten then typed up. And then some guy I was working for, he hired me to write a script for a movie that didn't get produced. But anyway, I wrote the script, and he had Final Draft. He got me Final Draft as part of the deal because he had a line on software. So I was like, great, So then after that, it was Final Draft. Not that I think that's that interesting, but it was a transition for me at that time to, kind of, and I never looked back, I never handwritten a script ever again.
Wow.
But that Open Road one might be, the Open Road was, I did a video feature with my friends in high school that's 2.5 hours long, and that's a road movie, a post-apocalyptic road movie. So that title was in my mind for a long time, but I'm not going to get into that. You don't have any more memory cards. It's hot in here. Everybody wants to go home.